Let's go to the first slide. Types of fracture. Okay, types of fracture. Fracture, a traumatic fracture. Okay, number one is traumatic, and number two is pathologic. So let's differentiate these two. A traumatic fracture occurs when when significant or extreme force is applied to a bone. Examples include broken bones caused by impacts from a fall or car accident, and those caused by forceful overextension, such as twisting, injury that may cause an ankle fracture. Okay, so that's that example that we have here, like an ankle fracture because of extreme overextension or twisting. Okay, so that's a traumatic fracture. Again, the key word here is extreme force is applied to a bone. So that's the key statement there. Okay, so everybody knows what traumatic fracture is, right? When a strong or a blunt force is applied to the bone and the bone cracks, the bone got displaced, and that's a traumatic fracture. Okay, so I don't need to like really expound on that because you guys know what a traumatic fracture that is being talked about. What about this pathologic fracture? Okay, let's read. Pathologic fractures occur through areas of weakened bone attributed to either primary malignant lesions, metastasis, or underlying metabolic abnormalities, with the common factor being altered skeletal biomechanics secondary to pathologic bone. Okay, so the difference between these guys, traumatic and pathologic fracture is the type of fracture that a patient may develop or sustain if the bone is already breached or compromised because of the bone is weakened. Okay, you know what we just read, guys, showed that the difference is very evident, right? The traumatic fracture is because of a strong or a extreme force applied to the bone, which you make the bone injured, okay, or cracked or displaced. That's your traumatic fracture. But the pathologic fracture is that there had already been the bone is already compromised because of the patient's say pre-existing bone disease like cancer. Okay, what else? If a patient has a metabolic derangement, or if a patient lacks of is lacking of calcium and no longer getting enough calcium to strengthen the bone. Usually, this type of injury or condition occurs at an advanced age. So we have what we call osteoporosis, right? Osteoporosis is one of those conditions that make the bone weak. So that is one of those circumstances or situations when the bone's strength becomes compromised because of, again, for this pre-existing bone degenerative disease. So when the bone cracks or the bone got injured or fractured because of a existing bone degenerative disease, that is what we call a pathologic fracture. Okay, now when you're assigning a code for these types of injuries, guys, you have to be able to determine whether this is traumatic or whether this is pathologic, because the coding is very, very different. Okay, let's go to coding traumatic fracture. Now, why just traumatic fracture? Because we already talked about coding pathologic fracture in chapter 13. We're going to focus on coding of traumatic fracture. Okay. So let's go here, guys. Says here, fractures of specified sites are coded individually by site and the level of detail furnished by medical record content. Okay, so the first one says you have to code all fractures that is determined, that is reported in the medical record, if the medical record says patient had fracture of the thigh bone, patient had a fracture of the humeral bone, you have to code everything by site and also the level of detail of what type of fracture it is. If a patient suffered like a specific type of fracture, like an open fracture or comminuted fracture, transverse fracture, so code it to the very detail of that, how it is described in the medical record. Okay, so that's the first instruction here. What else? A fracture not indicated as open or closed should be coded to close, and a fracture not indicated whether displaced or not displaced should be coded to displaced. Let me repeat. A fracture not indicated as open or closed should be coded to closed. A fracture not indicated whether displaced or not displaced should be coded to displaced. Okay. Sometimes, guys, when you go look for the code, okay, for any type of fracture, sometimes when you go to the tabular, you will see different options of whether it is an open fracture or closed fracture, or displaced fracture or non-displaced fracture. Now, if in the absence of the doctor's specificity, whether this is an open or whether this is closed, whether this is displaced or non-displaced, you are to code them as what the guidelines are giving us instruction for. So the default again is closed and displaced. Let me repeat that. The default to the type of fracture is always closed and displaced. You may encounter this question, guys, in the AHIMA exam. So remember that. Okay. So we know now the default kind of fracture that we're going to be assigning the code for. What else? Okay, the open fracture designations in the assignment of the 7 character for fractures of the forearm, femur, and lower leg, including ankle, are based on the Gustillo open fracture classification. When the Gustillo classification type is not specified for an open fracture, the 7 character for open fracture type 1 or type 2 should be assigned. Okay. Let me talk about a little bit of Gustillo classification, guys. If you go Google it, what Gustillo classification type of fracture, it is actually an open fracture. So what is an open fracture? This is a severe form of fracture when the bone actually is taken out of the skin. Well, it seemed gross or morbid, but that's what open fracture is. Now, what is the term we're talking about here? Can I erase the stuff on the board now? Just this one, so because we're still going to be talking about the other forms. Okay, so the term we're talking about here is the Gustillo type. Okay, Gustillo classification. So the Gustillo classification, guys, describes the severity of the open fracture. It starts with type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4. The guideline said if there was no specific type of the Gustillo fracture, you are to code it as type 1 or type 2. That's what the guidelines say. Okay, code it as to the type 1 and type 2. When the type goes higher, like type 3, type 4, that means to say the fracture is more severe than compared to the type 1 and type 2. So as the category goes up, category 1, 2, 3, 4, the fracture becomes described as more severe. Okay, now again, the Gustillo type, guys, is always an open fracture. Now, because this is an open fracture, the assignment of 7 characters is different. Let's go back here. Okay, So these are your 7 characters, B, E, H, M, Q. Okay, B, H, M, Q for the type 1 and type 2 Gostillo classification. Okay, so what are these 7 characters here? We're going to find out what these 7 characters are. So far, guys, you just need to remember that initially when we were reading, the fracture guideline or the injury guideline, guys, we were told that most of the time, the 7 character for injuries are limited to those 3 letters, the A, the D, and S. Now, when it becomes to this Gostillo type fracture, if you notice, guys, the Gostillo classification type of fracture, you no longer have the A, D, and S. Look here. Let me go back to what the guideline gives here. Okay, look. You don't see the A, the D, and the S here, right? Well, the S is still gonna be applicable for sequela, but look at this is our initial and also the subsequent 7 character. Okay, and I will show you guys what these are. Why is the Gostillo classification not getting the 7 character letter A and letter D? And again, this is the type of fracture that is severe, that is open. Okay, it's not just a simple fracture like a hairline fracture. It is a severe fracture. This could be a fracture where bones are broken into few pieces. It's gross to really imagine, right? But this is the type of fracture we're talking about, and it's open. It actually sticks out from the skin. Now, what are these 7 characters that are being talked about here? Look here, guys. Thank you, Christy. So look here, guys. The 7 character that these other types of fracture that are being discussed here, guys. Look at B here. See that? Look at the E here. The B is initial for type 1 and type 2. For the subsequent, letter E, letter M, I think, and letter Q. These are the 7 characters that are discussed here. B, E, H, M, Q, matter of fact. Okay. So what are these? So letter B is initial. That means to say, guys, your initial 7 character is not only limited to A, the initial 7 character can also be, or can also be letter C. But because the guidelines is saying if the Gostillo classification is not described or there is no specification whether this is the severe type, the 3 or 4, no specification of the Gostillo classification is documented, you default to type 1 or type 2. Let me go back here, guys. See this? Let me read again. The open fracture designations in the assignment of the 7 character for fractures of the forearm, femur, and lower leg, including ankle, are based on the Gostillo open fracture classification. When the Gostillo classification type is not specified for an open fracture, the 7 character for open fracture 1 or 2 should be assigned. So these are the B, E, H, M, Q. Okay, so now that I've shown you guys these different 7 characters, okay, the default for the Gostillo classification when there's no specification as to the type is provided, you always default to type 1 and type 2. For common coding scenarios, guys, like if you're working for like family doctor, internal medicine providers, you probably need not worry about these different types of Gostillo classifications because most of these type of scenarios, guys, will only describe that this is an open fracture. This is, this is this type of fracture. But if you work for an orthopedic department or orthopedic surgeon, the orthopedic surgeon may be giving you more detailed type of that injury. So you have to know this, okay? And also, guys, from what I have heard, that lately, probably not too lately, there was a question about the Gustillo type of fracture. So you really need to know this. You might encounter this in the AHIMA exam. Okay, so the default is type 1 and type 2, and you got to look at those different 7-character application. It's not A, it's not D, okay? The 7-character, at least we'll start with letter B. Okay. By the way, from the AHIMA exam that I heard, this type of question came out. The answer was letter B. What is the initial for type 1? What is the initial 7-character for type 1 and type 2? And the answer is letter B. Okay. Now, in the guidelines, there was also a statement that says these type of fractures usually happen or occur on those specific type of bones. Which are those bones? Those are the long bones, okay? The bones of the forearm, the lower leg bones, the thigh, okay, or femur, and including the ankle. Those are the kind of bones or the type of bones where this Gustillo open fracture may happen. And what are those bones, guys? Those are long bones. Long bones have the tendency to get injured as to what is described in the guidelines, right? Because the bigger the bone, and if the accident is so massive, this bigger bones are the ones most likely will shatter or will be broken into few pieces, or it will probably be the one that is going to experience that open type of fracture. So we now know what an open fracture is, the Gustillo classification. We now know that the default is always closed, is always the displaced, right? And also now we know that the 7-character is not only limited to A, D, and S, but we also have other 7 characters that can be applied to this acute type of acute fracture.